And now for our keynote address, boosting economic and social outcomes and well-being through superdiversity consciousness, from Mai Chen. Mai is the managing partner of Chen Palmer, adjunct professor at the University of Auckland Law School, director on the BNZ board, chair of the Superdiversity Institute for Law, Policy and Business, New Zealand Asian Leaders and Super Diverse Women. Mai previously sat on the government's Trade for All Advisory Board and Securities Commission. She has chaired government reviews and authored many books and reports, including the Superdiversity Stocktake and the Impact of Superdiversity on Health and Safety, Discrimination Law and on the Courts. Mai has twice been a finalist in the New Zealand of the Year Awards and was the top 50 diversity figures in public life in the Global Diversity List in 2016. Mai is joining us today from Zoom, over Zoom. Welcome, Mai.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful and I'm really sorry that I can't be with you, but the difficulty with being a practicing lawyer is that I am also required to meet court filing deadlines. So that's required me to stay here so that I can be closer to all of my papers today. But what a great time to be talking about superdiversity. When the conference organisers told me that they were planning on having a conference this late in December, I thought we would have all checked out by now to be thinking about our holidays and presents and Christmas and whānau. But there couldn't have been a better time because the Royal Commission report into the terrorism attacks in Christchurch in 2019 has provided us with just the spotlight we need on superdiversity. It's not the only issue that's arisen, as you know, hate speech, hate crimes, the fact that police have been wrongly classifying them, the fact that stuff has recently come out and apologised because of the racist way that it's depicted to tangata whenua in its coverage. Even the issues concerning New Zealand's success at beating COVID, at eliminating COVID, when nobody else in the world is really doing quite as well as us, apart from Taiwan and a few other places, really comes down to superdiversity. But what I want to do is give you one big idea today. If you can take away this idea and nothing else, then it's fine. It's simply this, that actually when you read the Royal Commission report into the terrorism attacks, what that is a fantastic example of the systematic application of the Superdiversity Framework on a particular set of issues. Now, given the length of time it took and the amount of resource they had, that report has been incredibly valuable as an example of exactly how to do it. Now, what do I mean? What's the Superdiversity Framework? Well, as you know, a single Pākehā lens used to be adequate for the public and the private sectors. And looking at the guest list today of people out in the audience, there are people here from the private sector, there are people here from the public sector. We didn't used to have more than a Pākehā lens because actually we were all pretty alike. But as Professor Spoonley's just explained, we're now not that alike. And we're super diverse in the sense that 25% or more of New Zealanders were not born here. In fact, in the latest census, we know that we're moving towards 30% of people who weren't born here. And we know we've got 160 languages and we've got over 220 cultures. So with the population change, adopting only a Pākehā lens can now result not just in racism, not just in being blinkered, but it can result in significantly disadvantaging a growing number of non-Pākehā New Zealanders, even now to the point of death and serious injury. That is what the Royal Commission into the terrorism attacks has found. And what it has found is that if government departments, now you notice they polled them all 217 of them, to determine which ones actually had information about the terrorist who did the shootings and killings and maimings in this case. And they found that 10 of them actually had information about this person. They also systematically looked at the laws. They looked at the way the police security agencies, they looked at MSD, they looked out to ethnic affairs. I mean, this was a pretty systematic, I really want to stress that word, systematic look at what happens when you look at a particular issue, not from a Pākehā lens, but actually from a super diverse bracket, including Muslim, close bracket, lens. When you say to yourself, we have a significant number of people here who were not born here, who come from a dramatically different culture and speak different languages, have different religions, and are really different in all sorts of ways. What difference does that make to whether or not we spotted the issue? You know, did we note that white supremacists and radical right-wing views, xenophobic views were on the increase? You know, we note this in health and safety, we note various things, but did we notice that this was an accelerating, dangerous, escalating trend? Why didn't we? Well, if you apply systematically a superdiversity lens, then it's very difficult not to pick that up as an issue. That, okay, you were looking at the Islamic threat, but at the same time, were you also looking at what the superdiverse were experiencing? For many of us, the white supremacists escalating threat is not something that's new, it's not novel. I know that when the mosque attacks happened, we gathered all our members of the Superdiversity Institute. I think I ran a session with the Race Relations Commissioner at Nang Foon, but we had, I don't know, we had 4 days to get it together. We had over 350 people. And overwhelmingly, the superdiversity were saying, well, yeah, we've been experiencing this at the coalface. You know, we've been experiencing much more racism. We've been having, you know, people write to us and say, we know where you live. If you keep speaking out about racism, we're going to get you. So it wasn't new to them. So in terms of putting a superdiversity lens on an issue and seeing it from their perspective, what were they saying? Well, I think the Muslim community was clear. They'd been complaining about hate speech, hate crimes, but talking about fear of retribution, fear of being assaulted. You know, all of these complaints were there. But the question was, were they being picked up? Well, we now find that actually police were downgrading this. So, of course, often it's difficult when you have not experienced something yourself to understand how serious that can be. I know how serious it is because I have had to send emails and communications I've received to the police, particularly when I've spoken out about superdiversity issues. So this ability to reflect society was also pointed out by the Royal Commission report. And it's nothing that I didn't point out in the Superdiversity stock take back in 2015. But that's the Royal Commission, and it's great because a large number of people are reading this report. And one of the things they talk about is the fact that actually the departments, the agencies, the statutory bodies involved didn't pick these issues up. And the reason was because they didn't have sufficient, adequate, high cultural capability. They didn't have an understanding of particular cultures, didn't understand the Muslim culture. There was a real lack of diversity in New Zealand's intelligence network, and they talked about the systemic failure over decades to recruit, develop, and promote culturally and linguistically diverse staff with the capability to help you to systematically apply a superdiversity framework. Now, that framework is designed to assist to position. Now, I'll talk about government departments for now, but it is no different for business. As I sit on the Bank of New Zealand board, if we are not capable of applying a superdiversity framework to our business, then we are not going to be able to determine the needs and satisfy the needs of a growing number of our customer base. But in terms of positioning New Zealand and the public sector to respond and to adapt to New Zealand's increasingly diverse population, there is a need for every government department to apply a superdiversity framework to all the work that they do, whether that be developing policy, whether that be reviewing their legislation to make sure that it's adequate, whether it is communicating with their key stakeholders, whether it is consulting with stakeholders. Quite often I get contacted by government departments and they say, we'd like you to come in and do some work for us on how we can properly engage with all New Zealanders. And they show me what's happened, which is that in general, they have a policy, they put it out, and it's the usual suspects, which is that they mainly get Pākehā respondents who are not from hard to get sectors, migrant sectors, Māori Pacifica, and also Asian sectors. And, you know, in Auckland, that's pretty serious because actually, if you look at the numbers in Auckland, there is just an increasing number, almost a majority now of Māori Pacifica and Asian peoples, if you put them all together. And Paul will have talked about the projections from Stats New Zealand. What you'll see is that this is not going to become less relevant, it's going to become more relevant. Now, that doesn't mean to say that government departments aren't busy at the moment, and industry, business. I mean, the BNZ has just been escalating our Tiriti o Waitangi framework. So, you know, gender's been a big issue, and departments have been getting their heads around that and making sure that there isn't sexism and that there is gender equality and that we're recruiting enough women. Tiriti o Waitangi, we've been putting treaty frameworks around departments and business and making sure that we are, you know, fit for the unique New Zealand context that we operate in. But of course, while we've been doing all of this, the population has been transforming. So for all those departments that have been criticised in the reports as not being properly resourced, as not having the cultural capability, as not being able to put a systematic superdiversity lens on the work that they're doing, this is only going to become a bigger issue and a bigger problem than before. I just recently completed a report on culturally and linguistically diverse parties in the courts. It's become a bit of a crisis in Auckland. Anecdotally, well, actually, all you have to do is rock up to the High Court in Auckland and get a chambers list, a duty judge list for the day. Half the parties have Asian names, Asian sounding names. Now, what the judges are saying is that they have an increasing number of parties turning up. They don't speak English. They're representing themselves. There's no documentary evidence. And the viva voce evidence, i.e. by affidavit or on the stand, is difficult to acquire because we have a real issue with our interpreters in New Zealand. You don't have to be qualified, no qualifications at all to be an interpreter in New Zealand. The pay rates for criminal cases where interpreters are provided by the state hasn't been increased since, well, for a very long time. I think for 20 years it hasn't gone up. And so as a consequence, we have not attracted good interpreters. Also, the matching isn't happening properly. So people say, oh, well, you're kind of Chinese. So despite the fact that the person is perhaps from Taiwan, they're getting someone from an interpreter from rural China to do the interpretation. Just completely different cultural context. And the judges are finding the interpretation hard. We've got lawyers who have Mandarin speaking backgrounds putting their hand up and saying, well, hang on, that interpretation is not correct. Or you get a situation where interpreters don't understand their role and they start to have a discussion with the witness. They're not supposed to be doing that. Once again, if you put a systematic superdiversity lens on the courts, which I know a little bit about, what you find is that there are a range of unique challenges which are arising, which is preventing an increasing number of New Zealanders getting proper equal access to justice. Now, that's the courts. For Kari White Island, you've had government departments which have been prosecuted. It would be interesting to think about the civil defence and emergency services in terms of their ability, but also their requirement to communicate with all New Zealanders, concerning emergencies. I think that's particularly important because they have an issue which is similar to the private sector and the public sector. Generally, when we communicate, we use conventional media. But of course, the Superdiversity stock take that I did many years ago now found that ethnic communities overwhelmingly prefer their own media. Doesn't matter how long they've been in New Zealand, 70% plus would prefer to still, listen to, Pacifica Radio, or pick up the Mandarin Times, or, listen to Radio Tirana, or look at Sky Kiwi if you're Mandarin speaking. So the issue is whether, if you put a superdiversity lens on the communications that businesses are doing and departments are doing, whether you are communicating with the people that you're wanting to hear from. So when departments say to me, devise us a strategy, because otherwise we don't hear from these communities and we're listening to the usual suspects, or we get submissions from the usual suspects, and you ask them, where do you publicise the fact that you are consulting? You find that it's, it's Stuff, and it's the Herald, and it's NZME, it's all the conventional places, but it's not the places where these people hang out. It's not the mosques, it's not the temples, it's not the Asian supermarkets. So what I'm trying to say is that the main topic of discussion today really doesn't even allow us to get to well-being. Now, Paul talked about social cohesion. We're a little way from there at the moment. We just need to stop people dying and being seriously injured because they are from a super diverse background. And all I'm trying to say to you is that when I go back to the work, even the first report that was done by the Superdiversity Institute in 2015, the summary of findings, because we did a review of government agencies, said, although some good work is being done, more is needed from government departments and agencies to systematically identify the impact that superdiversity has on the issues within that agency's role, determine what changes need to be taken, ensure the agency communicates with all New Zealanders about its roles, policies and laws. It's responsible for overseeing, build internal capabilities so that it has staff with the skills and cultural and language abilities to undertake the above analysis and implementation and communications with all New Zealanders who are citizens and with all customers of those agencies. So, of course, that applies for departments, but it equally applies for business. And what we have found is that when businesses come and want advice, essentially it goes like this: our market share is decreasing. I then ask them, what is the ethnicity of your customer base? They say, we don't know. When they get the ethnicity of their customer base, what you find is that if they have a large number of European background customers, well, if you look at the statistical projections, you know that those who are 65 and over, the average age of people from European backgrounds is much, much higher than those from Pacifica backgrounds, which usually have the youngest average age, followed by Maori. Even Asian is usually about 30, 31. So in terms of customer base, if you're wanting to ensure that you have a piece of the action of those who are young and growing into those years where they need a lot of servicing, then they tend to be disproportionately in the super diverse group. And so it's really important to note that almost all of the growth, now it's different, it's a little different because borders are closed, but of course, a lot of us are here. The question was just asked about young Chinese. It's a good question because people say, oh yeah, but we closed the borders and we're not letting them in anymore. Well, actually they're already here. And it's very difficult because when you do work in the superdiversity area, of course, those unique issues are different if you're first generation, if you're 1.5 generation like me and have been here for a long time because you have a foot in both camps, but there is just a growing number of people who are culturally and linguistically diverse, but they were born here. And yet some of those issues that they face of discrimination, as you've heard from the Muslim people born here, are still the same. They still look that way. They still look different. They still have different religions, different ethnicities. So I think I need to close. And in closing, can I say that if we could just do one thing, and well, maybe we need to do several things, but look, two big ideas, then two, sorry, I started with one, but actually it's the same idea. We need to realise that just as the Royal Commission has just done, we need to put a Superdiversity framework around what it is we are doing. And the second big idea, which is actually really the same as the first big idea, you need to have people capable of undertaking that framework. Otherwise, like the police, you're just going to downgrade hate speech complaints. Oh, yeah, okay, so someone called you some names, who cares? Why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant because actually that person then might next get out a gun and shoot you and your whānau. So, sometimes for people who are not super diverse and who do not feel the force of the venom and experience the fear, you may not rightly attribute the right amount of threat to what is happening. So you do need people who have an innate understanding of that. After 30 years as a lawyer, many people have said to me, why are you doing work in the super diversity area? Well, there are not many super diverse people in this field. And all I know is that having spent 30 years doing policy and law reform and litigating and looking at legal risk and understanding government, it is clear to me that we are not, that the laws, the policies, the services provided by both the public sector and the private sector are not keeping pace with who we are as New Zealanders. And the result of that is sometimes a lack of well-being. Sometimes it means we get less customers than we should, and we are not tapping into the growth. But at base, where did you go? At base, oh, I've lost you, hang on. Sorry, at base, the worst thing that is happening is that some New Zealanders are dying, and some New Zealanders are getting injured, and some New Zealanders are grossly disadvantaged and not getting equal access to laws, services, and protections. I did mention COVID, and I do want to end with this. The Superdiversity Institute did two reports, one for WorkSafe and one for ACC. And what we discovered is that the health and safety laws are not as effective if you come from a culture where health and safety is not valued. I firmly believe that New Zealand has succeeded in eliminating COVID because actually the health and safety culture in this country is very high. We take it seriously, we have serious laws, and they are enforced. But the reality is that we also need to understand that if you were not born here, and we have an increasing number of people not born here, then they will find it harder to take seriously the requirements to do, your lockdown level 4, level 3. Now, there's a lot of controversy around exactly what happened at the A to Z clothing store in High Street in Auckland, where the worker originally said, well, I felt really sick, and then I went to get a test, but I rang my boss, and my boss was super diverse, and he sort of said, oh, don't worry about it, stick a mask on and come in. The employer, I think, then got a lot of bad feedback from people saying, what the hell do you think you're doing? And then, of course, the story was retracted. No, I don't speak English. That was misunderstood. No, I came in because I wanted to. The boss didn't tell me to. All I can say is that in the work that we did, and the two massive reports, what we found was that it is much, much harder when you get employers who come from an environment where there's basically no health and safety in the countries that they've come from, to come to this country and then understand their obligations as an officer under the health and safety laws and make sure that they understand it, that they're providing adequate protections to their staff, that their staff understand it, because quite often super diverse employers employ super diverse staff. So super diverse staff don't know what it is they're entitled to, and super diverse employers don't know what it is they're supposed to be providing. All I'm saying is that that is potentially a risk from a COVID perspective if we are going to ensure that all New Zealanders, employers, employees, are doing what they need to do to maintain or to eliminate the COVID threat. Thank you very much. Now, I'm so sorry I can't see you, but I'm dead keen to take some questions. And I think all I need, Madam Chair, is that you might help me by repeating some of them so I can see them. But it would also be helpful for me to know who it is that's asking the question and where they're from. Thank you.
Thank you very much, May. That was really great. I've got some questions, but I'm going to wait to see if any of our attendees have questions so we can answer those first.
I'd just be very happy to have some feedback. It's just wonderful, you know, you write and you think about these things, and the time has come. It is here. It is now. Superdiversity is now. We're going to have to do this. Mahi.
Hello, my name is Tadina Coffin. I'm from Te Onewa Consultants. I actually live in Auckland at the moment. I was just wondering, because I'm not that far out of high school, I was actually just wondering, do you think the education system is doing enough to accommodate for diversity changes in New Zealand?
It's a wonderful question, and I can only repeat the answer that my son gives me. He goes to ACG in Auckland, and I said to him, Jack, when I was your age, I was bullied to bits. People kicked me, pushed me, called me Ching Chong Chinaman. It was awful. I said, are you bullied at school? And he said, Mum, are you kidding? 40% of the kids are anyone's in the place. Look, I think Auckland's you can, you know, that place. We grow up with it. It's the reason why, as a constitutional lawyer, I shifted to Auckland. People said it wasn't possible and I couldn't do it. But I felt that I needed to come to Auckland to come out as a Chinese person. There are lots of them here, and I feel quite at home here. So to be honest, that sort of education is less needed simply because the young people of today are growing in super. One of the first people that sponsored the Superdiversity Institute, and when I asked the CEO, Russell Stanners, why he did it, he said, well, I did it because I grew up in South Auckland. And, you know, all my mates were different. They all came from different cultures and races. So that's just the way I grew up. And that's the way New Zealand is. And that's the way it should be. So to be honest, I think it'd be pretty hard for them not. But we get ghettos, as you know. Pacifica live in one place, the Koreans live in another place. You know, the ethno-burb thing does happen in Auckland. Any other questions or comments? Hello?
Hi, May. It's Tracy here. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes,
we're having a little bit of, oh, great, a little bit of interruption on the line, but I think we got the gist of what you were saying. Thank you. I'm just waiting for another question, but while I'm doing that, as a public servant who spent most of my life in the private sector, what I'm hearing from you today is a real challenge from us to move from putting engagement in our cultural diverse communities from a stakeholder responsibility, because that seems to be what it is at the moment in the public service largely, to, you know, really increasing the importance of it and moving it more into a seat at the top table where you are looking at super diversity through a policy lens. So it's not just a check the box, we're engaging with those communities. And it seems like, boy, that's such a big change. And yeah, how do we start doing that?
Yeah, okay. So can I just say, if you don't do this, my dear, you're going to end up prosecuted. you're going to end up not carrying out your statutory responsibilities, because you have an obligation to all New Zealanders. And if you don't do this, then what the Royal Commission is explaining is you will not carry out your statutory functions. And you know, in this case, they found that nobody, you know, what was to blame. You know, a lot of excuses about inadequate resourcing, etc. And look, I am sympathetic. I know that there are good people and they're well-meaning, but it's not enough. And it's clear to me, because I have done this. I have applied the Superdiversity Framework for various government agencies to their work. And when you apply the lens, you get completely different issue spotting, completely different solutions, different ways in which you need to communicate, different ways in which you need to consult. It's just different. And so how do you start? Well, there's a framework. I've set out the start of the framework in the Superdiversity stocktake. It's actually there. I'm just reading it today. It's not bad, despite the fact that it was quite a quick job, but it's not bad. And then you need people with the capability and the expertise to be able to spot the issues, i.e. have those eyes to see. Otherwise, the only eyes that you have is the Pākehā ones. And so they just say, oh, well, you know, yeah, there's a couple of people complaining about, I don't know, someone screamed out something, you know, why don't you go home or something like that, or, you know, we hate Muslims or whatever, but it's not a biggie, you know, let's go down the road and chase the burglar or the rapist.
We've got time for one more question. Mai?
Kia ora, Mai. My name's Aroha. I'm with police. But
Kia ora.
The question is, kia ora, whether or not you, which I actually think should be elevated higher into legislative change and seats in our parliament. So we have Māori seats, but I think potentially we need to shift into that dimension as well. We need to establish some ethnic seats so that it's not just our policy framework, but it's our leaders within our countries, and then also into our local government, which is extremely hard at the moment, even for Māori. But how would you feel about pushing something that big?
Right. Okay. Many years ago, when I got a scholarship to go to Harvard Law School to do my postgraduate, I studied quotas, and my law professor, Professor Derek Bell, who was one of the first black African Americans to turn up in the Supreme Court, and Brown v. Board of Education, had just written a book. It was called "And We Are Not Saved," and he talked about the fact that quotas can be a flaw to ensure that you have a certain number of people of a particular ethnicity, but it can also create a ceiling, because people say, oh, well, you made us take 5 of these, and I don't care if the next person that comes in is a fantastic, you know, Māori woman, rocket scientist. I'm not taking that person because I don't need to take that person because you've annoyed me. So cultural change is important. Having said that, though, that was a long time ago, because I've been a lawyer a long time, and I have got to the stage now where I think that quotas are now more effective than they were, because before people were just saying, oh, well, there just aren't that number of people qualified. When I set up Superdiverse Women, when I set up the Superdiversity Institute, when I set up New Zealand Asian Leaders, I found hundreds of these people. And so I think we're at a situation in New Zealand now where you can't say that these people don't exist. They are out there. It is difficult, though, because the other problem with creating a quota is that whoever ends up in that spot ends up under a cloud of suspected incompetency. Oh, okay, are you just on the BNZ board because you're a woman and you're Chinese? It's that sort of problem. But if we get enough people in those positions, then that will make a difference. Because I think the Royal Commission report into the terrorism attacks makes it clear that there are real issues of leadership here. And if you don't have people in the top spots saying, no, sorry, I value what was just said, and this is important, then it is difficult, Aroha, to get the priority you need. Can I just note with respect to members of parliament, it is true that the current parliament that we have, which has just resumed, is the most diverse. But if you look at the number of Māori and Pacifica, they're actually matching or more than the percentage of the population. If you look at the Asian numbers, very low. So the reality is that we still have very low numbers of super diverse people in Parliament, and maybe that needs to be rectified. It's just that I know what comes with a Q word, which is people don't like quotas, and it means whoever fulfills those positions gets the token person that was put in. Kia ora.
Great, thank you very much, Mai, for your time today.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Go well.
Kia ora.
So I will clock out now. Go well. This is a really important topic. And thank you so much for your question, Madam Chair. It is the right question. And that really puts the ball back in the court of the departments. You can't put it on other people now. It's your responsibility. If your job is to service all New Zealanders, then all New Zealanders have changed. And so you need to figure out what that means for your day-to-day workload in terms of your statutory obligations. Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you. Kia ora, Mai.